You've probably seen the headlines, those really high-profile aviation incidents in India recently, things like the Air India 787 crash. They've certainly captured global attention, haven't they? And it feels like, well, a really crucial moment to understand what's actually going on with aviation safety over there, beyond the immediate news cycle. So that's exactly what this deep dive is about today. We're going to try and cut through some of the noise. We've got a whole stack of sources here, official stats, regulatory reports, details from the recent incidents, of course, and even what people are saying in online communities, sort of the grassroots perspective. The idea is to give you a really comprehensive look. Our mission basically is to arm you with a clear, well-informed understanding. We want to look at the progress, because there has been progress, but also the challenges that, well, persist in Indian aviation, helping you grasp the nuances that often get lost in just the breaking news headlines. Okay, so let's start by setting the scene with the incidents that really prompted a lot of these questions. First, that Air India 787 crash. Flight AI-171, June 12th, 2025. This was a Boeing 7878 Dreamliner. It crashed tragically just shortly after taking off from Ahmedabad, and the loss of life was just immense. 241 people on board, and just devastatingly, an estimated 39 people on the ground as well. The initial investigation reports, they seem to be pointing towards engine failure, and there are reports the ram air turbine deployed, that's the small emergency propeller, it pops out to generate power if the engines fail.
Right, the RAT, the last resort system.
Exactly. And the immediate fallout was pretty significant. International flight schedules cut by about 15%, fleet inspections ordered right away. India's regulator, the DGCA, they flagged maintenance practices. Though it's important to note, they also said they didn't see systemic flaws with the 787s themselves at that point.
Okay, so a focus on the airline's procedures, perhaps.
Seems like it. And then just 3 days later, June 15th, another really serious incident, a helicopter crash in Uttarakhand. It was a Bell 407, and tragically 7 passengers were killed, including a child.
Well,
Yeah. And poor weather conditions were noted as a significant contributing factor there. So these incidents, they're really stark, and they immediately raise that critical question, don't they? How do these fit into the kind of the bigger picture of aviation safety in India? Because perhaps surprisingly, the official data actually tells a more positive story in some ways.
you're absolutely right. It's a fascinating contrast, isn't it? Despite these very public, very tragic headlines, the official oversight bodies, like the DGCA, they actually show pretty significant progress and adherence to global standards. If you look at the DGCA's own safety reviews from 2023, there's some genuinely positive data in there.
Okay. Like what?
Well, they reported a 25% drop in high-risk air prox incidents.
Air prox, that's when planes get too close. Or...
Exactly. Too close for comfort, essentially. So a 25% drop there is pretty significant. It points to improvements in things like ATC coordination, pilot awareness, fundamental stuff.
Right. Crucial.
Yeah. And they also saw a massive 92% reduction in GPWS alerts.
Ground proximity warning system.
That's the one. Warns pilots if they're too close to terrain. And also 23% fewer unstabilized approaches during landing.
Which is a major factor in runway incidents.
Precisely. And crucially, these benchmarks, these numbers, they meet the targets set by international bodies like ICO and the US FAA.
Okay, so they're hitting the global marks.
They are. And what's more, back in April 2023, the FAA reaffirmed India's ISA Category 1 status.
Which is a big deal, I understand.
It's a very big deal.
Yeah.
It basically means that audits by both the FAA and ICAO found that India's regulator, the DGCA, consistently meets international safety oversight standards. And it's not just about having the standards on paper. The DGCA has shown a pretty active regulatory response after these recent crashes.
How so?
Well, they've launched audits of all the flying schools. They've requested pilot and air traffic control records for the specific crash flights. They issued an advisory related to Boeing 737 rudder systems, perhaps unrelated to the crash, but showing ongoing vigilance.
Proactive?
Yeah. And they've even drafted regulations to get dangerous structures near airports removed, things that could pose a hazard. So it really shows a body that is, engaged and seems capable of addressing safety concerns when they arise.
Okay. So on paper, the framework looks solid. The regulator is active, hitting international benchmarks. But as we often find in these deep dives, the official reports don't always capture the entire story, do they?
That's usually the case.
What are the sort of underlying systemic challenges, the things that maybe keep safety experts up at night, regardless of compliance reports? Because there seem to be some significant infrastructure issues and also human factor challenges beneath the surface.
Yeah, the things that are maybe harder to measure, but just as critical.
Exactly. Like, take infrastructure. India is seeing incredibly rapid airport and infrastructure expansion.
Which is needed for growth, of course.
Absolutely. Great for connectivity, economy. But the concern is whether there's been enough oversight of structures being built near these airports. Rapid building, maybe without thorough safety assessments, it means obstacles like new high-rises or even cell towers could potentially infringe on critical flight paths.
Increasing risk, especially in bad weather or emergencies.
Precisely. And then you dive into the human element, and some of the numbers here are, well, pretty sobering. Between January 2021 and March 2022, reports show at least 84 airport staff were found intoxicated on duty.
84. Wow.
Yeah. It led to suspensions, 9 pilots, 32 crew members. That's not insignificant.
Definitely not. Alcohol and aviation just don't mix.
Not at all. And then you have the persistent concerns about pilot fatigue and strain on air traffic controllers. These seem to crop up repeatedly.
Perennial issues in fast-growing aviation markets.
And a huge bottleneck, this one really stood out to me, is the shortage of aircraft maintenance engineers, AMEs. Currently, there are only about 7,000 AMEs serving the entire national fleet.
Okay.
But estimates suggest they'll need closer to 20,000 in the next decade to keep up with fleet growth.
That's a massive gap, almost tripling the workforce needed.
It's huge. Imagine like a Formula One team trying to run their cars with only a third of the mechanics they actually need. That's the kind of pressure we're talking about.
Yeah, the potential for missed checks or rush jobs under that kind of strain is on
Yeah,
that.
exactly. And training issues also seem to be a recurring theme. The DGCA actually suspended senior training officials at Akasa Air back in December 2024 due to lapses. And we have historical examples, right? Like the Air India Express crash at Kozhikode in 2020. That was a tail strike, overrun.
A very bad one, yes.
And the investigation highlighted broader issues with training, runway oversight flaws, decision-making in challenging conditions.
So a pattern, perhaps, of training needing constant focus.
Seems like it. And just to add another layer, there have been cybersecurity vulnerabilities reported at carriers like SpiceJet and Air India.
Which isn't just about passenger data anymore, is it?
No, not at all. Compromised systems could potentially affect flight planning, ground operations, communications. It's a direct safety threat in the modern era.
Absolutely. So we have this complex picture. Improving metrics, international compliance, but also these significant underlying pressures. Infrastructure, staffing, training, fatigue, even cyber threats.
Right. It's easy to just list them off, but what do you think is driving this? Is it just the sheer pace of growth? Or are there maybe deeper cultural or systemic pressures contributing to these lapses?
That's a really good question. And it ties into public perception too, doesn't it? Because while the official reports paint one picture, what about the people actually working in the system or the passengers flying?
Yeah, what are pilots, ATC passengers themselves saying? This is where looking at those online communities can be quite revealing.
Exactly. Insights from forums like, say, Indian Aviation or Indian Aviation Legends, they give you that kind of grassroots perspective. It's not official data, but it's lived experience.
What kind of things are cropping up there?
Well, for instance, one user shared details about an incident where apparently Air India pilots mistakenly tried to take off from a taxiway instead of the runway.
Wow, that's basic airmanship.
It is, and it was reportedly marked as a serious breach by the DGCA. It just highlights how easily, human error can creep in, even at that fundamental level.
Yeah, definitely.
And you see how that kind of thing translates into real anxiety for passengers. Another user expressed deep concern about one of the major low-cost carriers, Indigo. They said, and I'm quoting here, "Indigo's focus on efficiency. Too much pressure on pilots. Something terrible is going to happen if regulators don't start taking safety seriously."
That's pretty stark language. Something terrible is going to happen.
It is. It reflects real fear. And then you see other anxieties, people worried about flying because of, quote, overworked and understaffed ATC pilot fatigue. One user even suggested the situation might be, quote, worse in India than in US or Europe. Now, whether that's statistically true or not is debatable, but it shows the perception. These threads, they really echo those concerns we discussed: human error, training questions, the pressure cooker environment within Indian aviation, even while, the official reports show compliance with global standards.
So it raises that important question, doesn't it? How does that public and maybe even internal workforce perception align or misalign with the official safety data? What does that gap tell us about the real world experience versus the statistics?
Exactly. The lived reality versus the regulatory framework.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've looked at the tragic recent incidents, the positive signs and regulatory reports, the persistent challenges underneath, and even the community chatter. Let's try and bring it all together. What does this all mean for the overall safety of Indian aviation? Is it safe enough? How do we balance these conflicting signals?
Yeah, pulling it all together is key. And I think if we connect this to the bigger picture, it really comes down to building what you might call true resilience, something beyond just, ticking boxes to meet the letter of the law.
Okay, how do you mean?
Well, on the one hand, Indian civil aviation clearly has strengths. We can't ignore that. The DGCA's oversight does meet those ICAO and FAA standards. That's verified. Key safety metrics, like those airprox incidents and GPWS alerts we talked about, they are improving significantly based on their data.
Right.
And the regulatory bodies are responding to major setbacks. We see that with the audits, the new draft rules on structures near airports. It shows a system that's capable and, yes, largely compliant with global benchmarks, which is an achievement in itself given the scale of growth.
But there's always a but, isn't there?
There usually is in complex systems like aviation. The challenges are equally clear. Those recent high-profile accidents, the Air India 787, the helicopter crash, they really do highlight some very real systemic vulnerabilities. Things can still go catastrophically wrong.
Yeah.
There's that persistent pressure on personnel, lapses in training, in maintenance. They continue to be issues, and that's amplified by that huge AME shortage we discussed. You can't just ignore that gap.
No, you can't.
And the rapid infrastructure growth, while positive in many ways, it does seem to be outpacing the really comprehensive safety risk assessments and crucially consistent enforcement on the ground.
So the final assessment is nuanced.
It has to be. I think the overall conclusion is this. Indian civil aviation has definitely improved. It aligns with global safety frameworks. That's a major positive. Yet, those occasional very grave incidents serve as stark reminders of critical areas that need sustained, focused attention. Particularly, I'd say, the human factors, fatigue, training, decision-making under pressure.
Oh.
Comprehensive infrastructure planning that really builds in safety from the start, not just as an afterthought. Cybersecurity needs to be hardened, and ensuring adequate maintenance resources, not just having enough engineers, but ensuring they're well-trained, equipped, and working under reasonable conditions. Ultimately, the passenger experience and, just as importantly, public confidence, that's going to hinge on continued vigilant regulatory execution. It has to go beyond just compliance on paper to build that genuine resilience, the kind of resilience that can better anticipate and absorb the pressures of such a dynamic and growing aviation sector.
That makes a lot of sense. A picture of progress, yes, but with these really critical areas needing constant vigilance and, frankly, significant investment and attention. So thinking about everything we've discussed, what stands out most to you listening to this deep dive? Perhaps it's that tension, that balance between the official regulatory progress and those persistent human element challenges. Or maybe it's the sheer scale of the maintenance staffing needs the industry is facing. If you want to dig even deeper into this, there are a few ways you could go. You could follow the detailed crash investigation updates for AI 171 as they get released by the authorities. Those reports are usually very thorough. Keep an eye out for the DGCA's next annual safety review when it's published. See if those positive trends continue or if new concerns emerge. You might even look for analyses of pilot interviews or safety culture reports specifically within the Indian context if you can find them. And maybe for a deeper historical perspective, consider exploring studies of past major accidents in India, like Sharkey Dadri back in '96, or the more recent Kozhikode accident. Understanding how systemic learnings were, or perhaps weren't, fully integrated over time can be quite insightful. Lots to think about there, for sure.